So welcome everyone to the next Gen 4 International webinar presentation. Today's presentation on the role of nuclear energy in reducing CO2 emissions promises to be a very eye-opening event. We are pleased to have a group of renowned panelists with us to discuss. We'll have presentations from each of them for about 20 minutes and then open it up for panel discussion with your questions. If you do have questions, you can direct them to the panelists that they're pertinent to. It's my privilege at this point to introduce Dr. Patricia Pavier. Dr. Pavier is the group leader of the Radiological Materials Group at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. She's the National Technical Director of the Molten Salt Reactor Program on behalf of Department of Energy. She's also currently the chair of the Gen 4 Forum Education and Training Working Group. Patricia.
Thank you so much, Bertha. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you again, Bertha, for everything. I know it's very difficult when you have a technical issue, but that shows that we're live. So I'm very pleased to introduce our special joint webinar today, which is organized by the Generation 4 International Forum and the International Atomic Energy Agency, with an international panel featuring our three distinguished speakers. So Dr. Shannon Bragg-Seaton from Idaho National Laboratory, with Mr. Wei Wang from the IAEA, and Ms. Diane Cameron from the Nuclear Energy Agency. They will provide a presentation on the role of nuclear energy in reducing CO2 emissions, and all the questions will be answered at the end of our usual Q&A session. I'm also very happy to introduce my co-chair, Dr. Tatiana Jevremovic. Good morning, Tatiana. She's a team leader and a project manager for the water-cooled reactor technology development at the IAEA, and she's also the technical selection committee chair for the IAEA Marie Sklodowska-Curie Fellowship Program. A few highlights illustrating her eminent career: our project director and chief engineer in Europe and Japanese nuclear industry, university professor in Japan and the United States, and director of the University Research Reactor in the USA. She has contributed to more than 300 scientific papers and technical reports. So thank you again, Tatiana, for being with us today, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Very happy to be here and pleased that we organized this webinar jointly. So let me introduce our first speaker. We will go to Shannon. Just giving the time to Diana to figure out the technical issues in joining us. So let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Shannon Bragg-Seaton. She is the director for the Integrated Energy and Storage Systems Division in the Energy and Environment Science and Technology Directorate at Idaho National Laboratory. That includes power and energy systems, energy storage and electric transportation, and hydrogen and electrochemistry departments. She also serves as the National Technical Director for the Department of Energy Office of Nuclear Energy Integrated Energy Systems Program. Dr. Bragg-Seaton is currently serving as the chair of the Gen 4 International Forum Interim Task Force on non-electric applications of nuclear heat. Shannon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tatiana, and good morning to all of you. If we could just go to the first slide, please. Let me start by apologizing that this is going to be in a bit of a reverse order. My slides actually build on the previous speakers, which you haven't heard from. So we're just going to give you the bottom line and the answer up front with the next slide. So you'll get a little bit more on the motivation for why we're doing the work that we're doing in just a moment. But my first slide is quite aptly titled "The Bottom Line Up Front." So today, most of our nuclear plants and planned nuclear new build projects are large-scale systems dedicated to the production of electricity. However, we see a huge uptick in the number of reactor technologies that are being developed at a variety of scales, including micro megawatt scale systems up through hundreds of megawatts, small modular reactors up through very large scale systems, with more than 60 to 70 companies developing these technologies around the world. And many of these are advanced high temperature designs. Many ambitious goals have also been set globally for economy-wide decarbonization. So this means not just decarbonizing our electric grid, but also industry and transportation. These goals drive many different activities around electrification of industry, electrification of transportation, but they also drive many of the technology development areas needed to provide heat directly from clean energy sources, or to provide clean hydrogen production to support various energy demands. And we find that nuclear energy can be quite comparable to significantly increased renewable penetration on the grid. Now, we have a lot of work to do to prove the economics of these advanced and new smaller technologies, but there's many options and potential deployment options available for these systems. And we have to remember that these systems can also provide heat. Although we use our nuclear technologies primarily for electricity today, they are dispatchable and they provide high power density, and this heat can be directly utilized in a number of applications. So let's go to the next slide to look at a vision of our future clean energy systems. Within the integrated energy systems work that I do at Idaho National Laboratory and on behalf of the Department of Energy in the US, we look at a number of solution options where we want to maximize the use of all of our clean energy generation options, which means nuclear energy at a variety of scales and temperatures, working directly with other clean energy technologies such as variable renewables or fossil energy with carbon capture in order to provide both heat and electricity for electricity production to support the grid, but also to support the production of process intermediates such as hydrogen, to support water purification, industrial applications or chemical processes. And you'll see energy storage in the center of this image, which can also be a key to how we integrate these systems effectively, such that we can operate them safely, reliably, and to meet these various energy needs in a way that all of those demands are met at once. So on the next slide, you see some options for potential nuclear-driven integrated energy systems. In the schematic, you can see a number of integration approaches. This might directly utilize the heat from a nuclear system to drive the technology areas on the right, or in some cases, we may need to augment that heat using chemical heat pumps or electric heating to match the output of heat from a nuclear system to the heat demand on the right side of this slide. We also can directly integrate using electricity behind that grid interconnection, or we can produce a process intermediate such as hydrogen, which you can see is a feedstock to many of the applications, industrial applications that are shown on the right-hand side of this image. So one of the key questions we have to ask is, how do we prioritize these numerous options that are available to us? If we want to decarbonize these processes on the right, where do we need to tackle that challenge first? Well, we can look at the heat demand or the energy demand of each of these processes initially. How large is that demand? How large are each of the installations typically utilized for those applications, such as metal manufacturing or pulp and paper manufacturing? And what are the associated emissions? If we replace the current fossil-fired resources that provide heat to these processes, where with these clean energy options, where are our biggest wins? And so this is how we begin to prioritize our options. And within the US program and in many programs around the world, we see a high priority being placed on hydrogen production, because as you can see, that light blue arrow shows up on many of the processes on the right. And so we look at how can we economically produce clean hydrogen using low temperature electrolysis, high temperature electrolysis, that basically means breaking down water or steam, or thermochemical processes to produce that feedstock necessary for these processes on the right. So on the next slide, you see a snapshot of how we assess the potential of these different technologies. If we look at the typical tools and analysis approaches used to plan energy systems, we find some challenges in applying these tools to these new integrated energy system options. Typical capacity expansion models and production cost models focus on individual generators contributing to the grid, and they typically focus only on electricity applications. So we found a need to develop a different approach to the technical and economic assessment of these unique novel systems that might help us to answer the approach to decarbonizing both industry as well as the electric grid. I won't have time to go into all of these tools, but I do want to point you to this tool set called the Framework for Optimization of Resources and Economics that we have developed within the national laboratories in the US that support the optimization of system sizing, dispatch of the energy in real time, while utilizing very detailed process models to understand not only the system operation under nominal operating conditions and static conditions, but also under dynamic conditions, such that we can prove the economics of these cases and understand the potential options for deployment. We did recently complete a training course that will be available on our website soon, and I encourage you to take a look at that. In the meantime, let's take a look at an example where we used these tools to assess the technical and economic potential of nuclear hydrogen production. Now, this particular example was a collaboration among multiple national laboratories as well as industry aimed at evaluating the potential use of nuclear plants to make hydrogen via high temperature electrolysis while still supporting grid electricity demand. This was motivated by a need to enhance economics associated with a particular nuclear plant operating in the US. So we applied this tool set to evaluate technical feasibility as well as economic feasibility. Now, one of the cases that we wanted to ensure is that while supporting the electricity market, we also always were able to support the hydrogen market, meaning that we had to incorporate hydrogen storage in order to enable variable electricity production and hydrogen dispatch. So you can see a number of assumptions here that were included in that study, but let's look at some of the results on the next slide. These analysis tools can help us to determine the optimal dispatch of electricity. Once we optimize the sizes of the system based on electricity demands, electricity pricing, and hydrogen demands, and we establish the size of those systems, we can then look at how the energy in that system would be dispatched. So if I draw your attention to the figure on the right, you can see a map of the hydrogen production on the left relative to a 3-day period of time. And on the right, you see the electricity pricing. That black curve shows some of the dynamics in electricity pricing in this particular grid location. This is impacted by both demand as well as a significant amount of wind energy in that particular region. When the electricity price is low, the system optimally chooses to produce hydrogen and send that hydrogen into the storage system, such that when grid pricing is very high, when either that wind is not available or demand increases, we can dispatch hydrogen from storage and send that energy to produce electricity for the grid instead. And you can see this cycling going back and forth where we are optimally using the energy in that system to meet the various demands in the region. Now, quickly looking at the left-hand side, this takes a bit to evaluate overall and to understand the various components here. But if I draw your eye to an electricity price of $30, $30 per megawatt hour from that low temperature light water reactor system, we can see by coupling that system with high temperature electrolysis, we might anticipate a hydrogen production price of about $1.80 per kilogram. Now, the gray box and the orange colored boxes compare that price to the price of the incumbent technology of producing hydrogen using steam methane reforming with carbon capture and sequestration and without carbon capture and sequestration. And what I really want you to notice here is we're already in that realm of competitiveness depending on a range of natural gas prices, which is why these boxes have a range on the hydrogen pricing. So this is really encouraging and gives us some potential to move forward on nuclear production of hydrogen to support a variety of applications. So on the next slide, you can see that bottom line, that when grid pricing is low, hydrogen becomes more profitable. High grid pricing, we see that sale to the grid is more profitable. This hydrogen production and utilization of storage allows us to be very flexible in how the plant operates. And we can then support hydrogen demands for steel manufacturing, ammonia and fertilizer production, as well as transportation or even electricity production for the grid. For the particular plant studied, we can see a potential revenue increase of 1.2 billion over a 17-year lifespan remaining for that plant. And this led to an award from the Department of Energy in the US that is cost shared to demonstrate this technology to install hydrogen production at this 9 Mile Point plant in New York. And I encourage you to take a look at that full report to see the overall results. On the next slide, you'll see that this is just the first of several steel in the ground demonstration projects that will move to that next step of using nuclear energy to support an array of demands beyond just the electric grid. And these will start with relatively small scale hydrogen production systems, with the first producing hydrogen later this year. And these will then be the basis for scaling up that hydrogen production to produce a significant quantity to support an array of markets for that hydrogen in the latter portions of these demonstration projects. If we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the other questions that were asked. Number one, how does this challenge our operators within the control room? So we were able to utilize a laboratory here at Idaho National Laboratory called the Human Systems Simulation Laboratory to demonstrate how operators can manage that energy dispatch between thermal energy users and electrical energy users. So this laboratory mocks up a control room for a nuclear plant. So behind this, we have the coating that makes it represent a pressurized water reactor, and we also have a high temperature electrolysis system. And we were able to understand how we can place those new controls and how this interacts with the operator to ensure safe and reliable operation of this overall integrated system now that is producing both electricity and hydrogen. On the next slide, you'll see a quick snapshot of additional studies that we have done to assess the safety of using these nuclear systems in this novel fashion. We were able to conduct a probabilistic risk assessment for a generic light water reactor, and through those analyses, evaluate whether or not the licensing criteria would be met by co-location of this hydrogen production facility at that nuclear plant. And the findings were quite positive in that we could easily see the safety case being met without license amendment for siting that high temperature electrolysis system within a kilometer of those generic plants. And we do expect that safety case to be met for even even smaller distances. Now, this would require analysis of specific plants and specific geographic features before deployment at a specific location. But again, this is quite promising that we can operate these systems safely and effectively without a significant change to the licensing criteria. On the next slide, you'll see a quick summary of the next high priority areas that we are looking at for advanced reactors in providing heat and electricity to a number of applications. First, we're doing a deep dive on thermal energy storage to understand the best technologies to couple with a variety of advanced reactor systems in order to allow them to better support in a flexible manner electricity markets or industrial applications. We're also looking at where we utilize that hydrogen that we've now been producing. And the first technology area is synthetic fuel production. Many applications will be very difficult to replace via electricity or hydrogen. So we may also need liquid fuels in the future that have significantly reduced emissions overall. So we are looking at the production of synthetic liquid fuels to support, for example, the aircraft industry and air transport. Finally, we're looking at new pathways for utilization of those fossil resources that are now being displaced. Those carbon resources can instead be used as a feedstock to support a production of a number of high value products. And so we're conducting analyses, the techno-economic assessments necessary to understand how we integrate advanced reactors to convert this carbon to applications such as asphalt for our roads. On the next set of this, I will just quickly go through some of the experimental applications that we also support Now, deployment of these systems on an operating nuclear plant may not be the first step. Instead, we need to look at new additional tools and facilities that can support validation, technology demonstration, control system development, etc. So on the next slide, you see a quick snapshot of the laboratory here at Idaho National Laboratory that integrates electrically heated systems that emulate nuclear technologies, a thermal energy distribution system that allows us to move that heat to those coupled energy users. And co-located in this laboratory, we produce hydrogen. The indoor system shown here is a very small scale hydrogen production system. But just outside this high bay, we have large scale systems for that hydrogen production that is integrated with these technologies inside, such that we can begin to understand how we distribute energy in real time and how we operate these systems for large scale hydrogen production. On the right, you see technologies for microgrid emulation that allow us to understand how these systems operate within an isolated microgrid or within a broader balancing area of a larger scale grid, and emulating those power systems in that grid infrastructure alongside this new nuclear-driven integrated system. We also include a number of energy users, such as electric vehicle charging, that can cause significant variation in electricity demands. On the next slide, you'll see that this is also connected to our human system simulation laboratory, that control room I showed previously. And these facilities also allow us to connect to other laboratories to further enhance our ability to demonstrate multiple integrated energy systems while not requiring us to fully co-locate all of those systems in the same laboratory. On the next slide, you'll see that we're rapidly moving toward demonstration of advanced nuclear technologies on this timeline that shows initial demonstration of a microreactor at Idaho National Laboratory that is expected to go critical later next year. This is the MARVEL system. And as we march up this timeline, you see a number of technologies that will be developed within the next decade. First, demonstrating operation in the mid-2020s of a number of different advanced reactor technologies, and leading out to the end of the decade, a first commercial deployment of a multi-module small modular reactor plant with the Voyager system developed by NuScale and in partnership with the UAMPS utility. So these systems are a reality and they're coming very soon. And many of these developers are looking to these non-electric applications in addition to electricity production. And on the next slide, you'll see that GIF has recently launched a task force to evaluate these non-electric applications of nuclear heat. We've talked about the various roles that these nuclear plants can fulfill in a number of different regions. And this task force is working to pull together our knowledge base across the GIF members, across a number of organizations and research laboratories, to help us better understand the potential of these different options, the readiness of these different options, the emissions potential, the emissions reduction potential, and the overall costs of these systems. We do expect to still find some of these challenges that we need to overcome before we can fully deploy commercial systems, but we hope that this task force will help us to provide guidance to the energy communities and will accelerate the technology development. On the next slide, you'll see that we have a number of key questions that we are answering with regard to the optimal combinations of these systems, but I know I'm running out of time, so let me just switch to the next slide. And this one, just go ahead and click through this slide. We have a number of options under evaluation around the world, and we're pulling this knowledge base together to understand where we are, what are the gaps, and what are the challenges that we have yet to overcome. And finally, let me leave you on the next slide with a vision of the future, of a potential distributed energy system that could support all of the energy demands within a remote location, where within this image you see advanced reactors, you see wind and solar all working together collectively to support the electricity demand, but also to drive industrial applications such as this electrified steel mill or hydrogen applications, hydrogen utilization in steel manufacturing, or hydrogen utilization for the grid or for fuel cell vehicles. We can bring all of these technologies together to reliably and resiliently support all of these energy demands without emissions. So I hope that we can reach this vision of the future on both small scale and large scale. And now I hope that we can go back to our other speakers and you can see some of that motivation that would have built up to this presentation. So I hope this didn't leave you too far behind on some of the order of this, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shannon. So our next speaker is Mr. Wei Wang from the IAEA. He's the Director of the Division of Planning, Information and Knowledge Management in the Department of Nuclear Energy. Since joining the IAEA in March 2016, Mr. Wang has led the agency's activities in the capacity building in member states in energy planning and information and knowledge management, in addition to coordinating joint energy planning initiative with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, and the UN Regional Commissions. He has also served as the organizational focal point to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change, and he directly contributed to many key international events on sustainable development goals and climate change, such as the UN High-Level Political Forum, the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy, the UN Global Conference on Strengthening Synergies between System Development Goals and Paris Agreement, and a number of climate change conferences of the parties, including the COP26. He was the lead scientific secretary of the first IAEA International Conference on Climate Change and the role of nuclear power, convened in October 2019. So it's my privilege to have you away with us, and thank you so much for giving us your presentation.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and hello everyone. It's my great pleasure to be in this webinar and also this dynamic panel to share some information on climate change emergency and what nuclear can contribute. Before I start, I quickly give some explanation about the content. The content from this presentation comes from agency's publication and also our partners' publication, which aim at communicating with their policymakers and also other non-nuclear stakeholders. But content, we have a lot of publication which has in-depth and comprehensive information about each of the topics, which you can see in other opportunities to get that information. So for that, I tried to give some overview about what the agency has been doing and in terms of this climate change comeback and also the role of nuclear energy. Next, please. I'm sure you all have followed the development of the global studies on climate change. The 6 in series of IPCC reports, including the latest released one, is the IPCC AR6 Working Group 3 report. All these studies reaffirm the greenhouse gas from human activities are responsible for approximately 1.1 degree of warming since industrialization started. So unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reduction in greenhouse gas emission, limiting this temperature rise to 1.5 or even 2 degree will be beyond the reach. So from this chart in the slide, you can see the global greenhouse gas continues to grow. And in the past decade, despite a lot of efforts has been made, you can see the fossil fuel and the industry still dominate greenhouse gas emission. So that's why UN Secretary General appealed to all countries that we are on the fast track to climate disaster to keep the 1.5 limit agreed in Paris Agreement within the reach. We need to cut global emission by 45% this decade. So to answer this global emergency call, there is a need of global action with all stakeholders involved, with all available policies and the tools. Next, please. Let's take a quick look at how this can be addressed. In this slide, you can see the detailed breakdown of different sectors of greenhouse emission. You can see the power sector accounts for 40% of total greenhouse gas emission, followed by transport and industry, which are 24% and 23% respectively. So among the power sector, more than 2/3 all come from coal. Obviously, decarbonizing the power sector with a low carbon electricity and electrifying other sectors with deployment of low carbon energy carriers are the keys to ensure the objectives of the Paris Agreement can be achieved. So for this, nuclear energy can help. So let's take a quick look where nuclear power stands now. Next, please. So this is the global status of nuclear power, including both in operation and under construction. The current number of the reactor in operation is 441 with the installed capacity 391 gigawatt electric, and distributed in 32 countries. And also 52 reactors are under the construction with capacity around 53 gigawatt, distributed in 17 countries. So Europe ranks #1 in terms of the number of countries operating MPP and the total capacity. US has the largest number fleet, followed by France and China. So notably, the Nuclear Power Club has added 2 newcomers in the past 2 years, UAE and Belarus. 2 more, Turkey, Bangladesh, are on the road. Since the operation of the first commercial reactors 65 years ago, the nuclear power now accounting for 10% global electricity mix and 4% of global energy mix, has not only provided reliable low carbon electricity and energy supply and brought important social economic benefit, but also contribute to the global climate change combat. So this unique contribution to climate change mitigation has been gaining more and more recognition. So next, please. So this slide gives you some quick reflection of low carbon attributes of nuclear energy. On the right chart, you can see the lifetime cycle greenhouse gas emission comparison among the different low carbon technologies over the lifetime. You can see from the resource extraction to decommissioning, nuclear power and hydroelectricity have the lowest median life cycle greenhouse gas emission per unit of electricity output in comparison to wind power and solar. You can also see which stage has more greenhouse emission of respective low carbon technologies. So on the right side chart, on the left chart, you can see the total estimated avoidance of greenhouse gas by different low carbon technology in the past half century. So nuclear is estimated to avoid more than 70 gigaton greenhouse gas emission, following by hydro, following the hydro, which is the highest avoidance. This estimate is calculated using the average global average fossil fuel mix. Despite decreasing share of the low carbon technologies, nuclear still account for 1/3 of low carbon energy technologies. The other renewable began to make a noticeable contribution to low carbon generation from around 2000. So when increasing share of the renewable in low carbon power system, some technical and economical changes need to be addressed by the policymakers, including increasing needs of the flexibility. So now let's take a look at how nuclear power can contribute to this. Next, please. So with the increasing share of a variety renewable, and the flexibility will be at the heart of the future low carbon electric system. With a high upfront capital cost and the relatively low operating cost, the majority of the existing nuclear power plants are designed to be operated in the baseload mode for most of the efficient use of capital investment. But the agency's study on non-baseload MPP operation has shown it is feasible to design a new plant or convert an existing plant for flexible operation safely, reliably, and efficiently. It has been proven successful by several operators, and some valuable experience of flexible operation has been collected. The left chart, you can see the one study shows nuclear power can be more flexible than coal and gas to match the demand and support the integration of a renewable. And the right chart gives you a flexible example of EDF nuclear fleet since 1980s. Nuclear power plant in France has been operated flexibly to provide a good service, such as frequency and voltage regulation required for grid stability in safe and cost-effective way. Although most of these variants are performed by a small number of units, French nuclear power plant can run up and down by a big unit, such as reducing the nominal power from 100% to 20% in 30 minutes. I would also like to mention two other examples of flexibility. The NuScale, one of the new SMR design, which already in a quite advanced stage for deployment, can also increase its electrical power output from 20% to 100% in 27 minutes, and the thermal power output from 20% to 100% in 96 minutes. The Hualong 1, the Chinese new gigawatt generation 3+ reactor design, which already have 4 units in commercial operation, can also have a good load following feature with 2 modes in the range of 15% to 100% of rated power, 5% per minute and 10% per minute. And the flexibility service allow the nuclear power plant to adequately work with renewable and help realize cost-effective and reliable low-carbon electricity system. So agency has been coordinated cooperation among the member states to share information and experience on the hybrid system. Next, please. So this slide illustrates another nuclear value in terms of the use of the critical minerals consumption and land use per generation unit. So the recent IAEA report, the role of critical mineral in clean energy transition, shows nuclear power has a relatively low material intensity, which means that it's unlikely to face the bottlenecks in the supply of critical minerals that might hamper the deployment of other low carbon energy sources. So this study does not talk about some common metals such as steel, aluminum, and concrete, which are very important key bulk materials widely used across many clean energy technologies. But several other studies also show nuclear used less these materials comparing to wind and solar due to its high energy intensity. The right chart from one NEA study give you a visualized comparison. You can see the nuclear requires a much smaller land area per generation unit among the low carbon energy sources because of the same merit, high energy density. So it is in line with other studies, although there could be the more comprehensive comparative assessment of land use requirements, such as properties and condition of required land, the nature of land use, duration, and the reversibility of the transformation. So let's move to the economic dimension of nuclear, please. All this low carbon technology, including nuclear power, are characterized by a high proportion of overnight investment and the financing costs. So assessing their relative cost of different generation technology is complex. So from a basic economic metric point of view, the levelized cost of electricity, nuclear power is an economic source of electricity generation, combining the advantage of security, reliability, and the very low greenhouse gas emission. So the chart here gives you an overview of the LCOE cost structure of different low carbon technologies. You can see nuclear is still comparatively competitive to other reliable renewable at especially at 7-point real discount rate, and also could be the cheapest when the discount rate down to 3%. So from the cost structure, you can also see the overnight investment cost and the interest accrued during the nuclear power plant construction is about 2/3 of the generation cost, while over 70% for onshore wind and 80% for solar. So such capital intensive technologies are sensitive to cost of capital and the load factor. So here the LCOE does not include the integration cost or the system cost and the external costs such as environment and health. So although the overall capital cost of nuclear is comparatively competitive and different financing mechanisms for nuclear finance are also available, the capital intensive nuclear projects still face insufficient investment, particularly in the regular market. So lack of a misalignment of the incentive provided by the existing policy and the regulatory framework impacted the deployment of nuclear. So in addition to a long-term political commitment to For decarbonization, several principles for policy design have been identified, such as carbon price, competitive short-term electricity markets for efficient dispatch, the mechanism fostering long-term investment, so internalization of system costs, etc. So let's move to the next step, take a look at the social dimension of nuclear power. So investment in nuclear power can have been shown to generate multiple benefits in countries and communities hosting nuclear power plants. It can boost economic activities and job creation in the short term and enhance sustainable growth, development, industrialization over the long term. So one joint study between IAEA and the NEA shows the total employment in the nuclear power sector of a given national economy is about 200,000 labor years over the life cycle of 1 gigawatt generation capacity. So using France as an example, it is estimated for France that the nuclear program have to create 125,000 direct jobs and 285,000 indirect jobs. So the right chart illustrates the result of one recent study of IMF estimates. It shows that investment in nuclear power generates a larger economic impact than investment in other forms of energy, with a strong spending multiplier. So next, please. So now let's talk about the nexus of nuclear and climate adaptation. So like all other power systems, nuclear power plants are not immune to changing weather conditions. Extreme weather and other environmental conditions worldwide are forcing more frequent shutdowns or partially throttling nuclear reactor across all regions. But the data shows a better comprehension and anticipation of the risk, adaptive operational practices, and the new regulatory measures have largely reduced the impact of extreme weather conditions, and the reported losses decreased from 2010 in most of countries. So in general, with the robust facility design, the regular adaptation upgrades, and the limited reliance on vulnerable fuel supply chains, nuclear power plant has demonstrated strong reliability in the face of extreme weather conditions, which can contribute to the decarbonization energy system. Next, please. So after addressing the main attributes of nuclear energy, let us take a quick look at the nexus between nuclear and the sustainable development goals. Some studies conducted by agency give some analysis on nuclear power characteristics in comparison with alternative sources from economic, social, and environmental dimension. So this matrix shows the nuclear is favorable on many indicators. For example, in economic dimension, except overnight cost, nuclear perform well on resource adequacy, energy return over energy investment, energy reliability, and security, in addition to what I already mentioned, this LCOE in the previous slide. So in environmental dimension, except the waste and the water aspect, it performed well on other indicators, including land use, I mentioned already. In the social dimension, besides the employment benefit I just mentioned earlier, and it has good scores on human health and the fatality over supply chain. So agency study also shows nuclear technology support many SDGs, 9 out of the 17 SDGs, and nuclear power particularly contribute to SDG 7, SDG 8, SDG 13, and 17, which manifest the nuclear energy as a sustainable energy source. So now let's move to see what could be the future of nuclear energy. So there are many studies on the global trend of nuclear energy, including the agency's projection publication, RDS-1. It is an annual publication containing the estimates of the energy, electricity, and the nuclear power trend up to 2050. 2021 edition has its highest high occasional scenario in 2021 edition just published. Expect that nuclear power generation capacity will be doubled to 792 gigawatts by 2050 from the current 393 gigawatt. The low case projection indicate the world nuclear capacity by 2050 would remain essentially the same as now, 392 gigawatts. The high case projection is similar to IAEA's projection in the publication released last year, Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for global energy sector. Compared with the 2020 edition, this new publication has been revised up by just over, the estimate of high case has been revised up by just over 10%, which represent encouraging sign of increasing awareness that nuclear power's role in achieving net zero emission. So the realization of the IAEA high case scenario would require significant action, including an accelerated implementation of innovative nuclear technologies to allow the potential of nuclear energy in clean energy transition to be released. Next, please. As mentioned earlier, the decarbonizing the electricity production through the great use of low carbon sources such as nuclear power, hydro, wind, and solar is one of the two keys. Another one is to decarbonize hard to abate sectors like heating, industry, and transportation by clean heat sources and alternative energy carriers such as hydrogen and other synthetic fuels, which has been mentioned by Shannon. Nuclear power is well suited to decarbonizing the production of heat and hydrogen on a massive scale and increasingly competitive cost. So this is crucial when the whole world is moving away from coal and the fossil fuel power plant and speeding up toward low carbon energy world. So let's take a look at what nuclear can contribute. Next, please. So burning coal accounts for almost 45% of the energy sector of carbon dioxide emission worldwide, as well as a substantial local air pollution linked to millions of premature deaths every year. So transition away from coal is the key to success of the clean energy transition. So among the 32 countries currently operating nuclear power plants and the 10 countries deciding to include nuclear energy in their energy mix, several of them are heavily dependent on coal for electricity generation and heat supply. So these countries account for 85% global coal generation. So one study showed replacing just 1 percentage point of this coal generation with nuclear power would reduce annual emission by around 100 megaton carbon dioxide. So if 20% of them replaced with the 250 gigawatt of nuclear generation, would reduce emission by 2 gigaton carbon dioxide. So in addition to offering the low carbon electricity, nuclear plants can have the potential to replace coal in other applications such as district heating and industry process and the desalination. This table in this chart gives some illustrative analysis on the sustainability of the different nuclear technology. So you can see the large water-cooled reactor, regardless the size, are mainly suitable for electricity and district heating. And the various SMR design in different stages of development could be well suited to replace small coal-fired plant units across a wide range of applications. And some studies show nuclear power plant can help for either entirely replacing or potentially repowering power plants on the brownfield site, with the aim to maintain the generation capacity, ensure the continued base load and the load following capabilities, and the retained jobs on the site. This is also very crucial for the just transition during this global effort. So next, please. Let's talk about this application of nuclear in cogeneration sector. So there have been decades of experience of cogeneration in some countries, mainly in Europe. Up to today, about 15% of the current operating nuclear power plants are used to supply heat in form of steam or hot water, along with the power production to support district heating, seawater desalination, and industrial process heat. The total accumulated operating reactor years on non-power application is more than 750 reactor years, including 200 reactor year district heating application, mainly in Europe region, and also some industry application for oil and oil sand, oil shale extraction, and the enhancement of oil recovery are in Canada, Switzerland, and India. So up to now, only 1% of nuclear power heat is directed to non-electric application, and this indicates a big potential for nuclear to provide more low carbon heat in the decarbonization process. So some countries are expanding their nuclear heating program. So last November, one large-scale nuclear heating project in Haiyang nuclear power plant in China was in commercial operation. By replacing 12 coal-fired power plants, Haiyang nuclear power plant provides low carbon heat to 4.5 million square meters, benefiting the whole 200,000 residents in Haiyang city. The project is estimated to reduce 180,000 tons of carbon dioxide emission each year. Qinshan nuclear power plant in China also commissioned its first phase of the district heating demonstration project last December, which provided heat to 4,000 residents. When the whole project is completed, about 590,000 tons carbon dioxide can be reduced annually. The Temelín nuclear power plant of Czech is also expanding its district heating program, which will benefit 30,000 residents and can help to reduce 80,000 tons of carbon dioxide each year. So cogeneration of nuclear power plant does not only contribute to greenhouse gas emission reduction, but help to gain the energy efficiency as well. So according to the information of China, with the current cogeneration application, the energy efficiency of Haiyang nuclear power plant has increased from 39.69% to 39.94%. With a future expansion to 45 million square meters of heat supply, the efficiency is estimated to rise to 59.9%, which can largely increase the economics of nuclear power. Next, please. So Shannon has already mentioned a lot about this topic, hydrogen. So hydrogen is increasingly viewed as an effective and versatile energy carrier to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors, such as long-haul transport, steel making, chemical production, and other heat application. Sorry, please go to the hydrogen. Yes, the next one. Yes, thank you. So it can be used as a form of energy storage to address some challenges of operating a low carbon power system and to facilitate the integration of high shares of renewable. So demand for hydrogen is expected to increase significantly in the next 30 years as the transition towards a net zero economy advances. Hydrogen can be produced in various ways using different energy sources such as natural gas, coal, biomass, and electricity. The interest in hydrogen production using nuclear energy is growing internationally due to the potential to deliver electricity and heat from hydrogen for hydrogen synthesis in a sustainable, cost-effective manner. So conventional electrolysis technology are applicable for hydrogen production with nuclear power. So nuclear energy can also be combined with more energy efficient, though the less mature, the high temperature electrolysis and thermochemical hydrogen production processes. So this could potentially enable nuclear power to further increase its contribution to low carbon energy supply beyond electricity. So there are a number of the demonstration projects in the world to analyze the feasibility and the business opportunities of hydrogen production using the existing light water reactors coupled with low temperature electrolyzers. So these projects are driven by the need to improve the economics of the existing nuclear power plant, especially in the electricity market with low or sometimes negative prices, by producing additional high-value products. So there are also some R&D activities focusing on the advanced reactors and SMRs, including high-temperature gas reactors for non-electric application, in particular hydrogen production using high-temperature steam electrolysis, or the thermochemical processes, which has been mentioned also by Shannon in her slides. So some close to a market deployment already. The main issue for nuclear hydrogen is its economies. So a number of cases of scenarios estimate the hydrogen could be generated with nuclear power for a price between below the $3.5 per kilogram. But in order to be competitive, the price of nuclear hydrogen is supposed to be around $2 per kilogram. I think Shannon mentioned some kind of simulation through the US R&D effort and the simulation on SMR production on hydrogen. So agency also carried out some studies on nuclear hydrogen and developed one tool, the Hydrogen Economics Evaluation Program, to support the member states to analyze various options for future energy economies. And also agency recently also test one special tool frame to analyze the hydrogen production economy. Next, please. So as an intergovernmental organization specializing in nuclear technology within the UN family, agency has carried out many programmatic activities and projects to support its member states' pursuance of the peaceful use of nuclear technology. When more countries are committed to increasing climate ambition and carbon neutrality in the middle of this century, so agency is providing more specific support to ensure the nuclear energy can release its full potential. So in the R&D sector, agency is facilitating the cooperation on innovative R&D in both nuclear power and fuel cycle technology to strengthen nuclear safety and widen its non-power application. Agency also carried out some techno-economic analysis on nuclear energy and its application, including long-term operation, SMR deployment, hydrogen production, to understand the main challenges and the barriers, and to improve its economic competitiveness. So now more than 70 SMR designs are under the development in 18 countries. Agency has been intensifying its work in providing support to member states in their development and licensing, in order to facilitate safe and secure deployment of SMR and other advanced nuclear technologies to maximize its contribution. One SMR platform was established to provide expertise with a one-stop shop for agencies member states to access different support and expertise on SMR. Early this month, DG GROSI launched a new initiative, the Nuclear Harmonization and Standardization Initiative, bring together the policy makers, regulatory bodies, and the designers, vendors, and operators to develop common regulatory and industry approach to SMRs. So in order to address the position of nuclear power in the clean energy transition, one TWG was also established in 2021 to provide the policy and technical advice on the role of nuclear energy in clean energy transition. So noticing more countries have pledged to achieve carbon neutrality in the mid-century, agency is using its analytical tools and expertise to support member states to develop its science-based energy and climate policy and explore the different possible pathways to achieve them. So next, please. So when working with member states and international partners to further strengthen technical readiness, economic competitiveness, and nuclear safety and security to allow nuclear potential to be released, agency also conduct various outreach engagement with non-nuclear community to disseminate the value and attributes of nuclear energy and dispel the misinformation and misperception. So as part of UN system, agency has participated all COPs of the UNFCCC. So last year, under the leadership of DG GROSI, agency has made a first large presence in COP26 by dozens of side events, bilateral policy dialogue, and the media engagement. The message of nuclear is and will be the continuous part of the solution has been well spread. In order to keep the momentum, we are planning to continue this effort in COP27 hosted by Egypt this year. As one member of the UN Energy Agency, also actively participate in the high-level dialogue on energy. This is one important initiative under SDG 7 launched by UN Secretary General. Agency has contributed its global roadmap and the UN Energy Compact. It is encouraging to see the increasing recognition of nuclear energy in climate change, compact, and clean energy transition. From the EU Taxonomy Complementary Delegate Act issued early this year, to the latest announcement of Philippines on relaunching its nuclear program. Next, please. So in conclusion, that achieving carbon neutrality is an ambitious but feasible task as long as all stakeholders can work together with all available tools and low carbon technologies, including nuclear technologies. In order to ensure nuclear can continue to play an indispensable role and release its full potential in climate change combat, nuclear community needs to take more proactive action and work in a collective manner, including advocating favorable regulatory and policy framework for level playing field, facilitating innovative technology advancement, improving the economic competitiveness, enhancing communication with non-nuclear stakeholders, including policymakers and the public. So international cooperation will be the key to ensure this endeavor a full success. So this is what agency has been doing. In cooperation with our member state and partners, we are striving to turn IAEA high case projection and IAEA net zero ambition scenario into reality in the decades to come. Thank you very much. I stop here. I give the floor back to Tatiana.
Thank you very much for a comprehensive and very detailed overview of activities. I'm now introducing our third speaker of the day. That's Ms. Diane Cameron. So Diane is the head of the Nuclear Technology Development and Economics Division in the Nuclear Energy Agency. She has a distinguished career in the Canadian government, and she served as the director of the Nuclear Energy Division at Natural Resources Canada from 2014 to 2021. As a director, she headed up the division responsible for leading and coordinating Canadian public policy on nuclear energy. Diane was one of the Canada's Generation 4 International Forum Policy Group members. Diane, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who has joined us today for this wonderful event. It's my pleasure to be here today following a few little technical difficulties. Turning to the next slide, please. I'll start today by setting out some context, situating our discussion about nuclear energy and nuclear innovation within a climate imperative, before turning to nuclear energy, the role that it plays in mitigating emissions and its role in pathways to net zero by 2050. I'll identify some specific opportunities as well as challenges and a few recommendations for action. Next slide, please. First, some context. Turning to the next slide, please. So this presentation was, had we not faced the technical difficulties, it would have been sort of the scene setting presentation, but I'll try to sort of reposition it as the wrap up, really taking note of the potential of the technologies that were outlined by Shannon, and also picking up on several of the threads that then wove into the conversation, and we'll sort of bring it all together here. It does all build on the mounting climate change crisis, which has been identified by leaders and by governments around the world as one of the defining challenges for our generation, and nothing short of an existential threat. International organizations such as the United Nations and the OECD have found that climate change has the potential to threaten peace and security of people, as well as environment, nature, and economy. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has also identified climate change as a threat to food security, which could lead to scarcity-driven conflicts in addition to migration and refugee crises around the world. And in 2021, the UN IPCC report concluded that climate change is widespread, it is rapid, and it is intensifying. The report called for strong, rapid, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And similarly, the International Energy Agency has reported that the path to net zero emissions is narrow and will require massive deployment of all available clean energy technologies. Turning to the next slide, please. Simply put, the magnitude of the challenge should not be underestimated. Now, here we take a look at various organizations from the International Energy Agency and Bloomberg New Energy Finance to Shell and BP, amongst many others, who have published pathways trying to show us how we can get from where we are today to a net zero world by 2050. And there are a lot of these pathways out there. In a special report by the IPCC, they reviewed 90 of these pathways that are consistent with the 1.5 degree scenario, and 200 pathways for the 2 degree scenario. Now, despite the large number of these published pathways, there continues to exist considerable uncertainty with respect to the feasibility and with respect to the costs of reaching net zero by 2050. In particular, many of these published pathways depend on energy technology innovations that have not yet been commercialized or even demonstrated in some cases, such as widespread deployment of carbon capture, utilization and storage technologies, and an integrated hydrogen economy. It is notable, however, that none of the published pathways, none of them, project particularly aspirational scenarios for nuclear innovation. In other words, all of the published pathways include levels of nuclear energy development based on currently available commercial technologies. Some are a little more ambitious in terms of the extent of the deployment. For example, Bloomberg New Energy Finance envisages up to 7,400 gigawatts of installed global capacity by 2050, but none of the pathways actually depend on nuclear innovation that has not yet been realized. This is a significant gap in current publications on pathways, but it's also an opportunity because those of us who work in nuclear energy know that the potential exists for near-term and medium-term nuclear energy innovation to play a significantly larger role in decarbonization strategies. Turning to the next slide, please. Despite the uncertainties in the pathways, some conclusions are already clear. Number one, all published pathways present significant challenges for the energy sector from a technological, an economic, and a policy perspective. Reaching net zero will require rapid and far-reaching transformative change of the energy sector, which will require massive investments in energy innovation, as well as progress in a number of energy technologies that are under development. That's the first conclusion. The second conclusion is that all of these pathways require, and this is really important for us today, all of the pathways, without exception, require global installed nuclear capacity to grow significantly, often more than doubling from current levels by 2050. And 4 of the IPCC pathways call for nuclear to grow by a factor between 2 and 6 times. That's between 2010 and 2050, reaching as much as 13,000 terawatt hours by 2050, up from 2,600 terawatt hours in 2010. Turning to the next slide, please. So now I'd like to turn to the role of nuclear energy in these climate change mitigation efforts and in our pathways to net zero. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about new analysis that the NEA is publishing in a couple of weeks that begins to quantify the full potential for nuclear energy to contribute to emissions reductions, which can be understood as the sum of contributions from 1, long-term operations of existing fleets, 2, new builds of large-scale Generation 3 reactors, that is technologies that already exist today. Number 3, deployment of innovative small modular reactors. And number 4, non-electric applications, including heat and hydrogen, amongst other forms of sector coupling. Our analysis seeks to identify both conservative and aspirational pathways for these roles that the nuclear sector can play. In other words, minimum and maximum ambitions for LTO, that's long-term operations, Generation 3, that's the large-scale new build, SMRs, and non-power applications of nuclear power. And I'll speak to each one of these in turn. Next slide, please. So first, let's talk about long-term operations. Shown in solid blue here, you can see the installed capacity between 2020 and 2050 from existing nuclear power plants that are already planning long-term operations. That's our minimum scenario. Shown in striped blue, we show you an aspirational but still achievable and still realistic scenario. The installed capacity between 2020 and 2050 that could be achieved through long-term operations of the entire existing fleet, with each reactor operating for 80 years. And in red, the cumulative emissions that could be avoided from these long-term operations of existing nuclear power plants. So here we are talking about existing plants, not even existing technologies, but existing operating plants. We see that 49 gigatons of cumulative emissions could be avoided between 2020 and 2050, and this is very achievable and very economic. Wei talked about the economics of nuclear. We have the same findings that the economics of long-term operations are the most favorable economics. Turning to the next slide, please. Next, let's talk about Generation 3 new builds. In solid blue, you can see the installed capacity from 50 Generation 3 reactors that are already under construction. And in striped blue, a more aspirational scenario, the installed capacity that could be achieved if all of the Generation 3 new builds that are planned actually are realized. And in red, the cumulative emissions that would be avoided from all of these new builds, 23 gigatons of cumulative emissions between 2020 and 2050. So also still very achievable based on projects that are already under construction or already planned based on existing successful technologies. Turning to the next slide, please. Now let's talk about the pipeline of nuclear innovation, starting with small modular reactors. We consider 4 possible applications of SMRs: on-grid power generation, in particular for coal replacement and coal retrofit; off-grid for remote sites, including mining and remote communities where microreactors could replace diesel. So we're talking about off coal and now off diesel, and a possible market for marine merchant shipping, which is more speculative but under active consideration by some. So here we're talking about getting off of bunker fuel. And the last, high temperature SMRs for industrial heat application, including getting off of natural gas or fossil cogeneration. So off coal, off diesel, off bunker fuel, and off fossil cogeneration. Next slide, please. A key point to understand here is that near-term SMRs are expected in a range of sizes and a range of temperatures, ranging from 1 to 300 megawatts in size and from 285 to 850 degrees Celsius in temperature. Some very high temperature reactors reaching as high as 1000 degrees Celsius are in the research and development stages, but not ready for near-term deployment. On this scatter plot, we show you some, but not all of the SMRs under development, just to give you an idea of what's in the pipeline of innovation that could be deployed to help us on these pathways to net zero by 2050. The horizontal axis shows you the range of sizes, and the vertical axis shows you the range of temperatures. We've added some additional dotted lines to indicate the temperatures required by various heavy industries, and these are so-called difficult to abate or hard to abate heavy industry applications that require high temperature heat and today depend mainly on fossil cogeneration for that heat. Paper, soda ash, chemicals, ammonia, refineries, aluminum, steam methane reforming, and so on. One key takeaway from this graph is that the market could support a range of different SMRs across multiple different applications. So one SMR doesn't fit all applications. So we need some micros, some grid scale, some lower temperature, and some higher temperature reactors to abate all of these sectors. Next slide, please. And that brings us back to climate change mitigation. In solid blue, you can see a conservative estimate of installed capacity between 2020 and 2050. And this estimate is based on an informed by a literature review and analysis of global markets by the NEA, cross-referenced with Canada's SMR roadmap and the UK's nuclear national laboratories, amongst others. So that's our conservative estimate of the role that SMRs could play in the 2020 to 2050 timeline. But in striped blue, we show you a more aspirational projection where we have taken the conservative estimates of SMR markets in 2035 and extrapolated out to 2050. Now, this is an initial estimate, but we believe it's entirely achievable, and it is a possible scenario and a possible pathway. Here you can see the potential for exponential growth in the market that would result from fleet deployment and economies of multiples. In red, we show you the cumulative reductions in emissions avoided between 2020 and 2050. So that's another 15 gigatons of emissions avoided between 2020 and 2050. Turning to the next slide, please. Let's take a step back for a moment, and here I'll recall some of the concepts that were already introduced by Shannon, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but this slide depicts the future of hybrid energy systems that will include heat and hydrogen in addition to power. Here you can see a vision for how all these sources of non-emitting energy can be integrated to provide a variety of power and non-power applications. And this is an important concept because we know that there is no single silver bullet. All available non-emitting technologies will be needed, including in non-emitting sources of heat and potentially hydrogen, and working together in an integrated system. Turning to the next slide, please. Just a little bit on hydrogen, even though my colleagues both touched on this already, I'll just say a few words. There is an enormous amount of momentum around the world for hydrogen as a potential part of the solution to climate change. But hydrogen only has the potential to contribute to decarbonization, and I'll just state the obvious. If and only if it is produced with low carbon sources and its production itself does not crowd out decarbonization of other parts of the energy system, for example, by competing for low carbon electricity where supply is limited. So the hydrogen economy, along with hybrid energy systems and more broadly, is a complex concept characterized by complex dynamic interactions across energy subsystems. And hydrogen cannot be modeled as simply another source of demand for the electricity system, because hydrogen is also a tool for energy storage and sector coupling, which makes it both a source of supply as well as demand. We will be advancing at the NEA some more detailed analysis on the hydrogen economy to understand the levelized costs of hydrogen, and also some systems level analysis on the costs of hydrogen that take into account its role both as supply and demand on the supply and demand sides of the energy equation. Based on our early analysis, however, we can already draw some preliminary conclusions. And turning to the next slide, here you can see in light green the annual emissions avoided from nuclear power applications. In medium green, the annual emissions avoided from nuclear heat applications. So we've got power in dark green, heat in medium green. No, I'm sorry, light green was power, medium green is heat, and dark green are the potential annual emissions avoided from nuclear hydrogen production. These are initial estimates. We plan to do more work to tease out the details and really bring a lot of rigor around these numbers, but these give you an order of magnitude and a starting point for the conversation. In red, we show the cumulative emissions avoided from all of these power and non-power applications, and that reaches a total of 87 gigatons of emissions to be avoided between 2020 and 2050. Turning to the next slide, please. Here's another view of the same analysis. So I've just taken the results that we've already walked through and stacked them in a single chart. In solid blue and striped blue, you see the minimum and maximum scenarios for installed capacity from long-term operations of the existing fleet. In solid orange and striped orange, the minimum and maximum scenarios for installed capacity from Generation 3 new builds that we talked about. We've got solid and striped yellow to represent the minimum and maximum installed capacities for small modular reactors. And these are the same figures that we've presented throughout the talk today, just stacked together so you can see the combined event and combined effect. And again, you can see the cumulative emissions avoided in red. That is 87 gigatons of emissions avoided between 2020 and 2050. There's one more piece of information on this graph that I'd like to draw your attention to. It's the green horizontal line across the top that's labeled IPCC 1.5 degree scenario. So at the beginning of this presentation, I spoke about pathways to net zero, and I mentioned that the IPCC had reviewed 90 pathways for the 1.5 degree scenario. And we analyzed those 90 scenarios, and we too observed that on average, they call for 1,160 gigawatts of global installed nuclear capacity by 2050. That is nearly triple today's global installed nuclear capacity, which is just shy of 400 gigawatts. When we first saw this figure, effectively a target of 1,160 gigawatts by 2050, our hearts sank a bit, because our first impression was, holy smokes, that seems possibly unachievable. But then we sort of put that analysis aside and we completed our stepwise analysis, started with LTO, conservative, ambitious, Gen 3, conservative, ambitious, SMRs, conservative, ambitious, heat and hydrogen, etc. And we found, somewhat coincidentally, that it just might be doable to reach this so-called target of 1,160 by 2050. But that's only if the world can realize the aspirational scenarios, not just the conservative scenarios, but the aspirational scenarios for LTO, Gen 3, and SMRs. And then we could reach this target. Turning to the next slide, before we all sigh a sigh of relief and declare success, let's take a closer look at what it means. Though on this graph, we show you planned LTO in blue and planned Gen 3 in orange. Because while the aspirational targets may be achievable, they're not currently planned, which means there will be a gap, which is what's shown in gray, if we don't change our plans. And because of the long timelines for nuclear projects, to close the capacity gap that starts to appear during the 2030 to 2050 timeframe, governments would need to take policy decisions now to close that gap. So again, just to recap, it's achievable, but it's not currently planned. And so in order to achieve this outcome, we need to change our plans, and we need to do that now to make this a reality. Turning to the next slide, and one more slide thereafter, I'd like to now turn to the challenges facing governments and facing nuclear projects. The nuclear sector is already making important contributions to climate change mitigations, and it can and it should do more, but it faces many challenges. And the first one is that there is an urgency to action. And there are key enabling conditions for success that the nuclear sector and energy policymakers more broadly should address in the area of system costs, project timelines, public confidence, and clean energy financing. Turning to the next slide, which I think is my last slide, and the next one, please. I like to end on this concept. Beyond technical feasibility, there are a number of other conditions for success. And those include policy frameworks, regulatory readiness, including international regulatory cooperation to enable fleet deployments across international boundaries. Ramped up supply chains and talent pipelines are necessary for success. Understanding the market demand and the exact requirements of the market beyond just knowing that there are so many gigawatts of coal power that need to be replaced. We need to understand exactly how coal-owning power utilities take their decisions. What are their technical requirements? What are their timelines? Same thing that's for the off-coal challenge, for the off-diesel, for the off-bunker fuel, and for the off-fossil cogeneration. We need to understand exactly what those end-user customers need and on how they make their decisions. Public confidence and community support is amongst the most essential enabling condition, and that requires building trust, which is not something that can be done overnight. And so these relationships, these trust building relationships and these public engagement initiatives are so important. Strategic partnerships. We're operating in a different kind of a world now. It's no longer, strictly speaking, vertically integrated state-owned enterprises that are driving the sector. We're going to need private-public partnerships. We're going to need international partnerships and strategic partnerships across the entire length of the nuclear supply chain, but also sector coupling partnerships between the nuclear sector and the end-use industrial sectors. And lastly, we know that these projects are going to require a combination of public and private financing. So if we turn our attention to all of these enabling conditions and we decide to change our plans from conservative to ambitious, I think we can chart a path to net zero where nuclear energy is playing the role that it should play and needs to play. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Diane. Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Wei. At this point in the webinar presentation, we usually take a look at the upcoming webinars scheduled. We have scheduled the next 3 months, but in the interest of time, I think it's a good opportunity to open it up to the questions right now to the panelists. I will go ahead and advance, and you can read about the upcoming webinar presentations at your leisure. Patricia?
Yes,
Tatiana?
thank you, Berta. I don't know if the camera is working. Okay, yes, the camera is working, hopefully. So I'm gonna start. We have a lot of questions. We're gonna go 15 minutes more. I'm sorry, it's live, so we manage what we can. First of all, I would like to thank very much our 3 exceptional speakers. It has been really a comprehensive and inspiring webinar. And someone who said that it takes all the time for the speakers that they need to explain what we're doing. So thank you very much for the 3 speakers. The first question is for Shannon. Shannon, has INL performed economic modeling for offshore nuclear generation?
No, we have not yet looked at offshore generation. The tools that we have developed and that I briefly introduced do take into account regional data, regional demand, regional pricing, et cetera. So it's not a case that we would not be equipped to do if we have the proper input data. So it's something we haven't looked at yet. We've looked at existing fleet plants operating within the US, but certainly something that would be of interest going forward.
Thank you, Shannon. Tatiana?
Yes, please. Thank you. I have a question for Wei. Wei, the audience said it is good news that more and more countries are joining the nuclear power industry. But can you discuss what the nuclear forecast will be, with particular focus on the number of reactors shutting down over the next several decades, and how that may be expected to impact the global emission?
Yep, thank you very much for the question. I think that is the reality that because choosing nuclear is a sovereign right of the countries. So countries can make their decision on that. So we respect that one. In the meantime, we assess that the potential additional nuclear power capacity added by these so-called embarking countries. We know there are, in addition to the current 32 countries, we see some quite interest from some developing world, emerging economy. As I mentioned, we always talk about like 30 countries and who are interested in that, and which I mentioned in my slides, talking about the recent announcement by the Philippine announcement on their relaunch their nuclear energy program. This is a kind of a good sign for the nuclear community. So we hope more countries like that to consider that when they are moving toward this ambitious commitment in the framework of the Paris Agreement. So we see that there is a good chance to have that. That is why we have this high case projection, which actually based on the policy announcement or some kind of data available from different studies of countries. So the high pace of projection is not prediction, but it's kind of a reflection of this potential interest. So with that, if we can, as I mentioned, if we can work together to continue to contribute that, we can turn this projection into reality. So that's what I can say now.
Thank you, Wei. Patricia?
Yes. Diane, I have a question for you. So Diane, in what country do you foresee building a reactor that will be designed to produce hydrogen instead of essentially just baseload power or load follow with only 10–20% drop from nameplate capacity? It seems like we reduced power reactor size to save on upfront capital cost, but not to produce hydrogen. Is this profitable?
It's an interesting question. So there is, I think, an active debate about whether or not nuclear produced hydrogen is expected mainly from gigawatt scale reactors or maybe consideration of the role that SMRs might play in hydrogen production. I don't think we have the full roadmap yet. SMRs may allow hydrogen production closer to the sites of consumption and the sites of demand, whereas grid scale, large scale reactors could unlock gigawatt scale production of hydrogen, and we may end up seeing that that the market can support a mix of the two. In terms of which countries are going to be first to deploy, there are several demonstration projects already starting. We see a lot of interest on the demand side in Europe for hydrogen, but I think it's early days. But you may want to also ask Shannon to weigh in on this question. I think she's probably given it a great deal of thought as well.
Yeah, I'll be happy to jump in quickly. Bottom line, the economic viability of nuclear produced hydrogen is highly dependent on the location. It is dependent on other applications for that energy, that power from the system. What is it competing against? The studies that we have conducted have shown that yes, it is economically viable in some of the regions that we have assessed, and the technologies that you're using for that hydrogen production as well. Another factor in this is how steam methane reforming might be looked at in the future. Will carbon taxes or incentives for clean hydrogen production be applied, which can change and shift that economic viability of the nuclear produced hydrogen? So I would, if it is of interest in the area that you are located, I would suggest looking very specifically at what the competition is. What are the incumbent technologies? Where are the hydrogen markets? How might those change over time? What will that demand look like over time? And then assess the economic viability of these approaches. One of the benefits of nuclear produced hydrogen to get to clean hydrogen production versus renewables is that it's dispatchable, it's available, and we can go to these high temperature processes, which increase the efficiency of hydrogen production by about 20 to 25% relative to electricity-driven low temperature electrolysis. So these are all factors that have to be considered in making that investment decision.
Let's follow up with Shannon. Sorry.
Yeah, I could just add a quick additional information that the agency now is coordinating among the member states to collect this information regarding the hydrogen production. We are doing this like case studies, supporting by some countries who are testing this possibility to see if it can be scaled up to commercial application of this nuclear production, hydrogen production. Obviously, currently it's still in the pilot stage for some operators. So we will see how in the future, because I think economics is the main issue. The technology is not the issue. The economic is the main issue for nuclear hydrogen production.
Thank you, all three of you. So kind of a lined up question to follow. The question was for Shannon, but I will give the floor to all three of you if you would like to add. When do you think there will be a nuclear-driven integrated energy system deployed somewhere in the world?
For the webinar panel. Because I have been listening for 2 hours already. I'm sorry.
Wait. you were not muted. Okay.
Okay, so let me go ahead and jump in. When will we see a deployment of a nuclear-driven integrated energy system? We're moving in that direction very rapidly. So those demonstration projects that I pointed to, the first of those is already under construction. Yes, it is a small-scale hydrogen production facility, but it will be co-located on site at an operating nuclear plant with production of hydrogen this calendar year. The next implementations of that go to different plants in different regions will occur in 2023 and 2024. I think the next question is, when will we see a nuclear new build with integrated energy system applications? I expect to see that this decade. You saw my timeline with many of those advanced nuclear plants being deployed either as a demonstration system in the mid-2020s or a commercial unit in the late 2020s. Some of those may actually include an integrated system application. Let me point to the TerraPower demonstration system, the Natrium reactor that will be deployed in Wyoming, just one state over from where I'm sitting today. That one is going to be deployed initially as an integrated type system that incorporates thermal energy storage as a primary component of the base design that allows us to isolate that nuclear island. They expect to deploy that system in about 2027, and that thermal storage system allows us then much easier integration with thermal energy users than a traditional nuclear plant and how that is deployed.
Thank you. Would somebody, some others or panelists like to add something? Diane, Bei? Diane, you're muted.
Just to confirm and corroborate the timelines that Shannon has cited. So yes, we expect to see a few different types of nuclear innovation deployed in the very near future. We definitely see a lot of movement around microreactors that would be used for off-grid sector coupling with mining or remote communities. In the remote community context, we see interest for those microreactors to be coupled with variable renewables. In the mining sector, we see interest for those microreactors to be deployed for both heat and power at the mining site. So those are forms of integrated energy systems or hybrid systems, if you will. They're not all going to be the same, right? Some of them will have different coupling of generation options. Others will have different coupling of outputs and value streams. We expect grid scale deployment, for example, at Darlington in Ontario, Canada by 2028, I think is what they're aiming for. That'll be a grid scale reactor that then sort of paves the way for a fleet in the west of Canada where they'll be aiming to phase out coal in the mid 2030s, phase out coal, replace coal with an SMR fleet, excuse me, in the early 2030s. And so those timelines, I'm sorry, I didn't mention the timeline for the micro reactors. Demonstrations in progress right now, expecting commercial deployment by the end of the decade, and grid scale deployment also by the end of the decade and build out in the 2030s.
Thank you.
So Tatiana, I see on my watch it's 7:14 a.m. So we still have a lot of questions, but considering that we have other commitments, each one of us, I'm gonna give the floor to Tatiana for concluding remarks. But I take the opportunity again. Thank you very much to our three speakers and my co-chair Tatiana and Berta.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Berta.
Thank you so much to all three of our speakers, distinguished speakers and specialists in the field. I'm sure that audience had a great time learning new things and knowing how to get to the net zero future that is actually coming close to in realizing technological solutions. I want to thank GIF, Patricia specifically, and Berta for organizing flawlessly this webinar. And we are very pleased from the IEA side that we are able to contribute. So we are looking forward to a next joint coordinated webinar in the near future as well. I also want to thank really a big number of attendees today. So thank you for staying with us. It was a longer time than we planned, but I am sure that it brought a lot of interesting information to everyone. So once again, thank you everybody, and back to Patricia.
Thank you, Tatiana. As you know, our GIF webinars are all recorded and archived on the GIF website, so do not hesitate to spread the word out. The more we talk about nuclear energy and its benefits, the better. So again, thank you very much, everyone. I wish you a very good day or very good evening, wherever you are. And we will see you again next month, Berta and I, for our next webinar. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you, Tatiana.
Goodbye.
Thank you to the presenters. Bye-bye.